Okay, welcome to the final Jackson Hole China Forum for this academic year. I know this is the last weeks of the quarter, and the students are busy at writing papers and completing the exams, preparing the exams. So I'm so happy and grateful for whoever is here for a very, very wonderful talk today. In fact, our speaker just landed Denver a couple hours ago, and the traffic prevented him arriving earlier, but just on time for the event. Professor Fei-Ling Wang is teaching at Georgia Tech at Sam Nang School of International Affairs, Public Policy, whatever they call that, very similar to our school here, and he is currently a Nova Chair at the U.S. Air Force Academy. He just came back from a 5 weeks trip to Africa and took a lot of photos. So he will share his observations in Africa. Without further ado, please join me to welcome Professor Wang.
Thank you, Sam. Good evening. It's my pleasure to be here, and I apologize for being a little late because the flight was a little late and traffic on the highway was a little, less than ideal. So I was kind of right on time, literally right on time. Thank you. And Georgia Tech in Atlanta, we don't really start anything on time. We usually start 5 minutes after. We call it Georgia time. So Denver time is the same as Georgia time, 5 minutes after. All right, Sam asked me to talk about my recent trip to Africa. And of course, I have written a great deal. And it'll take me another 5 weeks to tell you the whole story. That'll be too long. So what I'm going to do today is very briefly share with you some of my impressions, observations, and then make 2 assessments about Chinese presence in Africa. That, after all, is my interest. I want to find out how China is doing in Africa, and primarily how China is perceived by Africans. Before I start, I have to make this little disclaimer. My trip was financed and sponsored by a generous grant from the Office of the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, OSD, at the Pentagon. And I'm still the Nova Chair at the U.S. Air Force Academy. In that capacity, they allow me to travel to Africa and to study what I want to study, that is the Chinese activity in Africa. But what I'm going to say today, whatever I'm going to say today, does not reflect anything, any view of the U.S. government, the Pentagon, the U.S. Air Force, or the U.S. Air Force Academy. It's all mine. So if you see a lot of mistakes, that's natural, because all my views. It does not represent any official view of any government agency. So hopefully that disclaimer will be sufficient. All right. What I did in Africa was very cursory and kind of fly over. I went to 7 countries, visited 18 places, interviewed dozens of people, from some high-ranking officials, including certain members of the public bureaus of certain ruling parties, to ministers and pro-China activists, missionaries, scholars, journalists, businessmen, and of course lots of Chinese businessmen and Chinese students, and illegal Chinese as well. I ran into a couple of illegal Chinese as well. Remember, Africans also have an illegal immigration problem. It's from China, which is kind of interesting. In a minute, I'll tell you more about that, of course. So I can literally tell you for days about how colorful, how wonderful Africa is. I mean, it's a truly amazing place to be. Other than the big 5, or the wildlife, all the wonderful landscape, the people there are just warm and authentic and also friendly. It's just truly a remarkable place to be. And all Africa is so colorful, though. Also, that's kind of impression that I walk away with, is that Africans are so different from each other. We tend to think, oh, Africans are the same. They're not. They're very, very different. Right? Even though from distance they may look the same, but they speak very different languages, very different cultures, many of them very rich and ancient cultures, right? And they have different ways of doing the cooking, which is my favorite thing, you know. Although in order to sample African delicacies, sometimes we have to take a risk of having a little stomach problem. That's also can be expected. In any event, I had a great time. So what I'm going to do now, in the next few minutes, is going to tell you, to share with you, two of the impressions I have about Chinese presence in Africa, primarily. The first impression I had about Chinese presence in Africa is China is experiencing an explosive, literally explosive growth of presence in Africa, all rounded. And the Chinese presence in Africa is truly remarkable, impressive, and profound. We can throw in many adjectives to describe that, right? Or epic, you know, because this is a really very remarkable. Let me just give you some hard facts, if you will, if I may. First, China has exploded from a small partner of trade with Africa to now the largest trade partner of Africa as a whole, right? In less than 20 years. That's a big explosion, talking about it. And China is also the largest trade partner of just about all the leading African countries, leading economies in Africa. With the noted exception of Kenya. Only Kenya? But Kenya still has India as the last trade partner, not China. That's an exception. Chinese investment in Africa also exploded from a very small amount to now somewhere between 150 to 200 billion dollars already. Very large. United States currently enjoys the second position in terms of trade partner of Africa. US for a long time was number one, but that position replaced 3 years ago. Now the gap between number one, China, and number two is getting bigger and bigger as we speak. The Chinese also are very active in official aid, government aid to African countries, so much so that most of the African countries are receiving regularly large sums of Chinese foreign aid, donations, free interest-free loans, grant, and also lots of on-the-table payment that we don't know exactly how much, but significant. Right? So out of 54 countries in Africa, 50 of them receive Chinese official aid. And the other 4 also get Chinese business presence as well. China's everywhere, in all African countries. And there's also a massive inflow of Chinese people to Africa. This, of course, is a loaded issue. It creates a lot of contention between local hosts and Chinese. And also has caught the eyes of the Europeans and the Americans. And so, wow, what's going on there? Also Chinese going to Africa. How many Chinese in Africa? That, just like many other aspects of Chinese presence in Africa, is still largely guesstimate. We don't know exactly how many Chinese are in Africa. The rough estimate is at least 1 million Chinese now live in Africa on a long-term basis. Some of them have been there for over a decade, even longer. The more liberal estimate is that the Chinese number in Africa are numbered up to 2 million. Right? So it's difficult to tell. Why is that? I cannot tell you exactly why that's the case. But one thing is for sure, it's a large issue, it's a big issue of management of Chinese immigrants in Africa, aka the semi-legal or illegal migration, or overstaying visa in Africa. That seems to be significant. I'll give you some anecdotal numbers, and now you can see why that's a difficult task to accomplish in order to count the heads. In Ghana, for example, depending on who you ask, which government agency you ask in Ghana, the estimate of Chinese there in Ghana is anywhere between 30 to 40,000 or to 50,000. Depends on which government agency you ask. That's a big difference. The margin of error is quite large. In Botswana, it's between 20 to 30 to 40,000. So it's, again, depends on who you ask. I'm kind of frustrated by that a little bit. In Namibia, it's 20 to 30,000. In Kenya, it's anywhere between 20 to 50,000. And one professor, economics professor, even told me his estimate is Chinese in Kenya are already in the neighborhood of 70,000. That's like 3 times as much as a government official estimate. So this is a kind of a very interesting, very unique situation, right? And lastly, in South Africa, which currently has most Chinese living in Africa, in South Africa, the estimate is anywhere between 150 to 350. So that's like double. What kind of estimate is that? You know, the statistics kind of really kind of hard to grasp. But in any event, now you see the task, the size of the issue. It's just so different, even counting people. Right? All right. In addition to trade, investment, and personnel inflow, we also have very active Chinese presence in Africa in terms of cultural exchanges, cultural activities. China has funded dozens of Confucius institutes, many Chinese language institutes, and also created lots of centers. Unlike your center here, San is kind of not a research center necessarily, but cultural centers, a variety of centers in Africa. And China has been very active. This is a kind of tradition. Before Deng Xiaoping era, China has been very active in providing public health, free public health sometimes, in very remote villages. They send doctors and nurses to Africa to treat people. And China also is very big in having a new program called Grand Propaganda or Great Promotion Campaign, 大卫宣, meaning in Africa they organized a media center in Nairobi, in Kenya, producing all kinds of TV programs, radio programs to be broadcast carried all over Africa. And this Chinese media center is humongous. It has hundreds of Chinese employees working there. Even one small radio called China Radio International, which is supposedly a small radio, right, has 6 people based permanently in Nairobi. That gives you the size. And CCTV, Chinese Central Television, has a huge team producing all kinds of programs. So they are doing other things as well. Finally, since I'm currently working at the military academy, so what about military exchanges? The Chinese are also very active in military exchanges with Africa. For a long time, China has been training African officers from over a dozen countries, more specifically Tanzania and Zimbabwe, especially training the officers. And China is selling weapons to quite a few African countries and providing military aid to quite a few African countries. So much so, some Africans have complained that some of their officers now are, quote, more pro-China than pro their own government, which I don't know whether it's true or not, but this is what I heard. Right? So Chinese activities are pretty extensive, even in security and military arena. And in addition to military aid and training, China has sent thousands. Actually, China is the largest source of peacekeepers, largest of the Security Council permanent members, the 5 of them. China contributed most peacekeepers to Africa, in places like Liberia and now Sudan and Angola, those places. China contributed over 2,000 of soldiers for peacekeeping efforts. Right? And also, as you all know, Chinese Navy now patrols the whole of Africa as part of the international effort of anti-piracy as well. So China is in Africa militarily. Although compared to economic activities, Chinese military presence is relatively small. It's under notice. So that's my first impression. Related to that, I have to say there's greater room for China to grow even bigger in Africa. In a minute, I'll tell you why that's the case. That's the perception, how Africans are receiving the Chinese. That's my second impression I want to share with you today. My second impression is a little complicated, so it may take a little longer time than the first impression. And it's not that straightforward. The second impression is local perception about China is very diverse and evolving and very complicated. In a minute, I'll explain to you why it's that complicated. In my opinion, the African reception or perception of Chinese presence in Africa now has a big spectrum, ranging from love, truly love, to suspicion, to complaints, even to hatred. The whole 9 yards, the whole spectrum is there. Right? It's very complicated. It's not just one kind of, oh, come, or go home. It's rather very complicated, very nuanced. So let me first point out the political elites, the Chinese government leaders. What do they think about Chinese presence in Africa. This is good news for Beijing, for Chinese. That is, out of 54 nations in Africa, I've never been to all 54. I wish I could, right? Because that can cost, depending on too much money, and I don't have time to do that. But the country I've been to, if they are reliable kind of indicators, political leaders in Africa almost unanimously and universally like Chinese presence. They love Beijing, right? Because Chinese come in with a few peculiar policies. And one policy is no condition attached loans and aid and on-the-table payment, right? No condition attached. Especially no condition attached regarding local political conditions, like human rights, democracy. Chinese don't care. You may be running your government as a democracy, fine, I'll deal with you. If you run your government as a non-democracy, fine too, I'll deal with you. If you don't have a government, I still want to deal with you. Right? That's kind of a no condition attached, no strings attached. And African political leaders love that. They really go, wow, this is great. This is refreshing. This is wonderful. And more than one African political elites coming into me, they think Beijing are treating them like adults. In other words, Chinese come in, put on the table, this is what I can give you, and this is what I want. Let's deal. Whereas Americans and Europeans come in, according to African elites, when they come in, they behave like a nanny. They start to nagging them, your rights, rule of law. Let's draw a contract. Let's bring in lawyers, right? And they don't like that. It's too complicated, so they don't like that. One more thing about why African political elites love China is Beijing has been indeed quite generous in dealing with those leaders. For example, you all know that in the past decade, China forgave billions of African loans and debts. It's like, oh, okay, just went off, right? That's pretty generous. And the Chinese financial aid is also quite generous, favorable terms and so on. So that's, of course, who has problems with money, right? Especially easy money, so good money, right? Especially no question asked money. I don't know about you, I don't have a question with that. I don't have a problem with that. If $7 million, no question asked, I'd be happy to take that. And make me love someone even more.
Never get.
Right, that's the problem. But without money, I still love you, no problem. So therefore, it's easy to see why those leaders really like that. A couple more things that may be kind of less noticed before. Why China is enjoying such a popularity among many political leaders is there seems to be a natural match between the Chinese way of governance, Chinese way of doing things, and African norms, or African norms. For example, the Chinese, as you all know, are not very legalistic, right? And we prefer guanxi over formal contracts, right? Connections. Right? We prefer making deals at the dinner table than on the ballroom, right? We both share kind of a dislikeness, even hatred against greedy lawyers, keep lawyers out, right? And we are flexible. Things can be done in ways that cannot be done in a country that has media always breathing down your neck, and you all get lawyers causing trouble, you don't have a kind of checks and balances, and restrict you. So therefore, Africans feel it's easy to deal with Chinese, right? And they feel the norms are matching to some extent, old norms. For example, cutting corners a little bit, and some under-table informal payment, some kind of a handshake first, contract later kind of argument, that's doable. And also Chinese, like many African political elites, seem to have a higher tolerance of, for example, income inequality, social inequality. Whereas Americans come to Africa in many countries, the first thing you notice, wow, the society is polarized. You have a fancy 5-star hotel right here. I was lucky enough to stay there. And you have utterly poor slums everywhere else. We noticed that. And then some Americans will say, let's do something about it. Let's change that. The Chinese come and say, well, it's just feel like home, right? It's fine. No problem. Right? It's actually better. In China, the gap is also very huge. But in China, of course, the poor seem to be less severe than in many African countries. So they say, well, we're just like you, but we have made it. Now you can make it too. Let me help you. Right? So that kind of matching of old norms, kind of attitudes, is very helpful. And Chinese emphasize groups a lot, social harmony, and respect social hierarchy. Like Sam is my boss, and then he's the boss forever. I mean, I just respect him, no matter what. That kind of respect to hierarchy happen to be also very common in many African societies, right? The chiefs, the president for life, and the warlords for life, they are in power. They're in power. They're in power forever. That's fine. Whereas Americans come in and question, saying, how did you get your power anyhow? Who voted you in? Right. Then we start to open the can of worms. All troubles start happening. So there's a kind of match in this area. That explains that. And the final thing that explains the African love of Chinese presence is Chinese have done some noticeable things for them. Infrastructure construction, for example, primarily. In Nairobi, in Kenya, out of Nairobi, and in many other African countries, the roads, you can predict most of the roads are constructed by Chinese. The only exception is Namibia and South Africa and Botswana, where the roads are constructed by, mostly not by Chinese, but still some Chinese take over. But in Tanzania, Kenya, Ghana, and roads usually constructed, you can predict, it's supposed to be Chinese made. Yes, it is Chinese made. Why? It's not because they write up made in China on the road. It's actually because many potholes 3 years after construction. The Chinese quality of construction is not too good. You can predict after 2-3 years potholes everywhere. You have to be very careful to navigate and drive. But between no roads and roads is qualitative difference. Right? And Africans really appreciate it. And the Chinese also have been smart in the sense that government funding has been pouring into construction of public projects like a stadia, like schools, movie theaters, and so on. Right? You can easily see, wow, it's Chinese building, right? In a minute, I show you some pictures. Right? And so therefore, it gets another way. Whereas American money and European money, when they pour into a country like Tanzania and Kenya, most money goes to what? To NGOs, to training stations, to empower the women, to empower the poor. Where do you see that? How much empowerment can you measure? Difficult. Right? Whereas Chinese, this is their building, this is their road, this is the bridge, this is a power station. You can point to. So people like that. Easy to understand, right? So in a way, the Chinese have picked up some kind of smart approach to go to Africa. Alrighty, let's talk about spectrum. I mentioned spectrum, right? Let me just mention there are growing suspicion. I'm quoting direct word from some Africans, and even resentment among Africans as well against Chinese. You may ask me, why the Africans enjoy so much, from China, and yet there are negative feelings towards China. Well, what are the negative feelings? Let me just list some of them and share them with you in no particular order, for importance, of course. The most common complaint among Africans is that the Chinese are just like the Europeans. They come in to exploit our resources, to extract our resources, right? And leave behind very little residual industrial capabilities, which is a fair critique. It's a fair critique against both Chinese and Europeans and Americans, because we don't leave behind, a well-trained workforce, the factories. We leave behind big holes on the ground, and many roads full of potholes, right? But that's like kind of not really good for long-term development. So that's one leading complaint. I interviewed many Chinese miners and asked them how they run their businesses. For example, in Zimbabwe and Botswana, how they dig in, get gold and diamond, right? And the way they described to me, and they actually are not bashful at all, using the word so-called, in Chinese we call 掠夺式开采, meaning predatory extraction. They literally say that. And the reason for them to do that is this is the cheapest way to do it. There are cheap ways to do things, there are expensive ways to do things, right? expensive way would be train local workers, develop infrastructure, facility, construct a city, and then go dig and build a mine. The cheap way is to go dig a hole, get the gold and diamond out, sell them all on black market. By the way, all Chinese merchants in Zimbabwe sell their gold on black market. Why? Because the government wouldn't have tax them, wouldn't be able to tax them, right? And that's kind of extraction, and that's leading complaint. That I would say is widely shared, even in South Africa, interesting enough, which is the most developed economy in Africa. And related to that, many Africans are complaining about the Chinese bringing money, and they take our resources away, and they didn't even bring any good institutional values. That's actually interesting kind of complaint among some elites, especially college students, faculty, and the journalists. They say the Chinese come in just money business and no added value. For example, the Chinese help may actually, unintentionally perhaps, stunt local social reform, because now the dictators get enough money to survive, right? They don't have to tax people as harshly, so therefore they don't have to engage political reform anymore. Democracy, ironically, is actually stumped, retarded. It's actually blocked. Right? So social reform actually is blocked, stumped. So they are putting the things in China. It's because you brought all the money here, right? Make our leaders feel good, make them rich. So therefore they are not doing reform. That's maybe a fair criticism. Another complaint is that Chinese may be using, this is from discussion with some African strategists, policy analysts, they think China may be using Africa as a chip in its global struggle against Europe, right? The tip against people who are not from Mars, who are actually from the United States. Right? They basically are talking about the Africans may be used as a chip, because Africa will vote for the Chinese in the United Nations and so on, and they feel being taken advantage of. And a typical question I got was from one pretty high up in one African capital, and he asked me, "So Professor Wang, you tell me, why would Beijing be so nice to us if they don't have any evilish conspiracy behind it?" I'm dumbfounded. I couldn't tell. I don't know. What evil intention do you think? They just want to use us against Americans. When they achieve their goal, we'll discard it just like nothing. Well, maybe it should, maybe not. But that's kind of a suspicion we're talking about. They think there's a China conspiracy going on. In other words, why would Chinese come over saving billions, right? Why would they be so good? I also kind of say my jokingly tell them, maybe Chinese just born angels, which come in with money, or maybe Chinese are so rich, we get money to burn. There's a fund to put money, right? Put too much money in U.S. Treasury is not to be productive. That's right. So I don't know. So that's actually a creeping suspicion among the policy analysts, among some leaders. Another, lastly, the most important, I should say, or the most commonly held complaint against Chinese presence in Africa is the Chinese are coming, or new colonialism is happening in Africa. Surprising, right? They think Chinese are coming in schools, but big numbers, indeed, they are. In many places, you do see them working. And the Chinese are coming by big numbers, legally, illegally, directly or through other countries and so on. They're coming in different sizes, literally shapes, with different kind of education background and financial resources, with different kind of aspirations. So therefore, the Chinese are coming. I was landing in the airport of Zimbabwe, and there were a bunch of South Africans on the same plane. And one South African NGO leader, she's a black African woman, very smart, well educated, actually studied in the United States. And she was just commenting to me very bluntly, China is constructing a new colonial empire in Africa, and Zimbabwe is part of it. Well, is she right or wrong? In a minute, I'll try to tell you my comment on that, whether she's right or wrong. But that impression is shared in many places. Then you may be interested in knowing that why the Chinese are coming to Africa, are going to Africa. After all, it's kind of a harsh environment, alien place, Most Chinese there I interviewed, they don't speak the local language at all, and they don't even speak much English either. By the way, many of the Chinese in Africa, they don't even speak Mandarin well. You know, they come from places that don't speak Mandarin well. So why do they come to Africa? You know, suffering all this hardship, separation from family, and food problem, and so on and so forth. Well, I have a short laundry list of reasons I collected from those people and share with you. One, on top of my laundry list, the reason Chinese are going to Africa is kind of surprising, even to me. That is, quote, it's freer here. You have more freedom in Africa. That's just surprising. You know, what? Africa is free? Yeah, it's freer. And related to that is the officials are easier to deal with here. I guess it doesn't take too much to bribe them. You know? Because that's the implication. Right? That's kind of interesting. The third reason, of course, simple, is easy to make money. There's a lot of opportunities, especially, quote, a few years ago. Now, because the RMB in China currency is appreciating, going up, and because African, quote, leaders getting smarter, that's the original quote. It's harder to make money now, but it used to be very good money making. It's still pretty good because they're still there. Right? It tells you. And a few other things I want to share with you. The air is cleaner here. That's what it's supposed to do. It's kind of true. It's kind of true. In Africa, countries other than a few metro centers, the air is really good. Good quality. Good quality. And Africans do not use chemicals or pesticides very much. So many Chinese commented, the food here is more delicious, especially the chickens, because the chickens are not caged. They run around wild chickens. Cool, tasty. They don't look very good. The vegetables don't look very good, but tasty because they don't use much pesticides and chemicals. And Chinese actually bring in their way of using chemicals to Tanzania and Zambia. And now cause little problem, culture conflict. And finally, final reasons they are noted is I just want to get out of China. And then if you press them, they give you a few reasons why they want to get out of China. The main reason actually they think the return of investment in China is diminishing. No money making opportunities anymore. It's hard to make money or hard to find a job. So if they offer you a lucrative job, just go. So that's actually, and also corruption as well. Corruption, or somebody had a little problems, local officials, they run away. There are also people clearly engaging in money laundering and capital flying activities. Just capital flying. So it's right. So that's another list I get. It's by no means conclusive list, of course, but it's just kind of a list. All right. So what? Are the Chinese stay there has become colonial masters, so to speak, to colonize the continent? Unlikely. Right now. Almost all Chinese are interviewed, with very, very few exceptions. Well, actually, there's no exception. All Chinese are interviewed. They all say, guess what? I don't want to stay here. I want to leave. Once I make money, I leave. Or if I don't make money, I still leave. Also, and very few of them want to stay there forever, permanently make it a home. And that's quite different from European colonial masters. They come in, they took the land, they live there, they colonize it. That's hence colonization. So the Chinese are not really colonizing. They are temporary visitors. Although some of them have been there for 20 years. And they're all families. They're all relatives are there already. It's kind of, de facto living there permanently already. But they still think, I will leave this place. Believe me, I leave. Right. If I made it, I leave. But of course, I'm not saying go back to China. And I asked which Chinese, once they made it, where do they go? They give you all kind of answers. But one reliable way is to ask where do they send their kids? Where's your children? Where are their children now? Where's your son, his daughter? With no exception, they are all studying in schools in Australia, Canada, Europe, and the United States. Let's move that way. If they don't make it, well, go home or go to another African country. In other words, I do not see the Chinese as colonial kind of immigration. That's close. That's an observation. But you never know. 20 years is a long time. How many 20 years do you have in your lifetime, right? You see, 20 years, another 20 years, de facto you'll stay there for forever. All right, very quickly, I'm going to share with you two assessments I have had regarding the presence of China in Africa. And then I'm going to show you some pictures. Pictures, one picture was 10,000 words. So, I have a lot of pictures. They was 100,000 words. So I'm going to show you some of the pictures. All right, one assessment, first assessment. There is a widespread argument or speculation that the PRC has big strategy, big conspiracy cooked up for Africa. Either colonize Africa, or occupy Africa, or monopolize African natural resources for its global competition with the United States, or turn Africa into Great China, or whatever. This kind of speculation, or fear, if you will, especially among some of our European friends, French, for example. My assessment is, I don't think there's such a coherent strategy in Beijing. I don't think so. If there were such a conspiracy in Beijing, then it is very poorly designed. And it is even worse, much more poorly implemented. Case in point, many of the things Chinese are doing in Africa are canceling each other. They're shooting themselves in the foot. So some activities by the Chinese government is really effective in terms of charming diplomacy. Buying friends, acquiring influence, building connections, and so on. But the hundreds of thousands of Chinese that come in, they cancel all that charming diplomacy altogether, right? So I don't know whether it's a good poor coordination or there's no such conspiracy. So that's my first assessment. So either there's no such conspiracy, or the conspiracy is very poorly done, right? So in general, my assessment is that China and Africa, the efforts of winning the hearts and minds of Africans so far has been very, very cost ineffective. Right? It takes them billions of dollars, lots of efforts, and not necessarily buying love of African hearts and minds. That's called cost ineffective. Right? So that seems to me a kind of not a great way to have conspiracy or enforce conspiracy. The second assessment is that compared to that, if there were such a strategic competition between the United States and China and Africa, who's going to win? Who's going to have up hands? Right? The future is in whose favor? My tentative assessment is the U.S. may indeed actually enjoy quite a bit of hand. The U.S. presence in Africa, in terms of influencing the hearts and minds of Africans, is actually very cost effective. I'm going to show some pictures later. Right? In other words, it is a terrible mistake for us to overlook Africa. This was changed a little bit during a second term of Bush administration, and Obama administration continued the policy that is to go back to Africa, so to speak, pay a little attention, visit Africa, and for God's sake, we didn't create Africa, although Africa will get in Europe. I mean, it's not secret, you know that, right? So we have an African command of the U.S. military that's located in Stuttgart, in Germany. Not even Africa, but at least we have an African command. And American attention is going up a little bit. But given a little attention we have for Africa, we have a lot of influence, if you will, in Africa compared to Chinese. So if there was such kind of competition, I'm cautiously optimistic about the outcome of this competition, if there were. And as I said, I actually suspect there may not be such a competition to begin with. And the Chinese are out there for optimistic reasons. And so on. All right, let me stop here and start to show some pictures and make some kind of comments as we're going on. And then I'll stop to see if you have any questions. How much time do we have?
You can just show all the pictures, 100,000 words.
Okay. All right. With all permission from the boss. Yeah, that's good. All right. So this is the picture of in Pretoria, the capital of South Africa, where President Xi Jinping of PRC visited. Part of my visit actually overlapped with his visit in Africa. It was kind of very interesting. You see Chinese flags and South African flags, but I have to show you, I have to warn you, this is one of the very, very few places you can see Chinese flags in Africa. Very, very few. They are either on temporary display for ceremonies, or they are over the buildings of Chinese embassy. Other than that, you actually don't see many Chinese flags in Africa. China in Africa, although has enjoyed explosive growth, as I mentioned, right, everywhere, but it's largely stealth. It's kind of very interesting. They're very stealth, very under the radar screen. And this is actually one of the exceptions rather than more. All right, for those of you who have been to China, you know what this is. Oh, sorry. This is a famous brand of Chinese bottled spring water, right? The Chinese export everything to Africa, including bottled spring water. I deliberately buy one in South Africa just to see how extensive Chinese list of export is. That's the goods. And this one, another Chinese specialty, massage. And the Chinese massage is also exported to Africa. Right? This is supposed to be authentic Chinese massage, even with Chinese characters on it. Right? In other words, you can see Chinese economic presence in Africa is huge, explosive, growing fast, and also very extensive. Anything that can be marketed, you can find in Africa. Of course, how do Chinese live? That's another thing. When I mentioned that the Chinese are coming, causing a lot of anxieties in Africa, I should have added that the Chinese live in Africa in a very peculiar way. They are largely isolated from local communities. They live by themselves. Unlike American and Europeans, when we go to Africa, the first order of business is you go out to experience, to mingle, right? To make friends, quote unquote. Maybe make a lot of enemies, but still, you go there to talk to people and enjoy. No, Chinese stay by themselves. And this is rather typical for Chinese stay in Africa. This is the Chinatown in Windhoek in Namibia, right? This is literally a fortress-like place. This is the entrance to Chinatown. Security guard, barbed wire, electrical fence, all 9 yards, right? And throughout Africa, you see this kind of communities almost everywhere. They're very for themselves. This create, of course, the suspicion about conspiracy. Are these Chinese aliens? They come here just sit by themselves, right? They have the evil plans. And I talk to Chinese diplomats. So why would you guys do this? And they say, well, for a lot of reasons. Manage them, easy to manage for the embassy to manage them, and security concerns and so on, and dietary concerns, right? So a lot of reasons. This is another one in Cape Town, and this is the one in Nairobi, in Kenya. It's quite interesting. This is right next to Chinese embassy. This is constructed by Chinese merchants called China Center, but the Chinese merchant who constructed this place complained bitterly about how terrible the Chinese embassy has been in dealing with this project, because they were duped. They duped us. The Chinese diplomats persuade them to put the money to construct a China Center, and then later on, they forget to tell them the location is pretty bad. It's far away from any commercial center in the city, very close to the embassy. So therefore, the guy who developed the project lost huge amount of money, and so no chance to get the money back. So he's like, they're stepping us, never listen to them again. They duped us. But in other words, this actually is a good illustration to show you that the embassy does have a working relationship with Chinese diaspora to a great extent. See, that's the embassy next door. This is literally next door, even next door, the Chinese embassy. This is one Chinese supermarket, if you will, I visited. Thanks to your daughter, she took me there to this place, and I had a pretty extensive discussion with the owner of this shop, and it's really shocking how much racially based and ignorance-based kind of prejudice on both sides of Chinese and other Africans. For example, the guy who runs the store told us openly he never allowed local people to shop in his store. Local meaning black Africans, right? And I was kind of puzzled, how can you make money? You're in Africa, right? Oh, we got a lot of Chinese. There are indeed a lot of Chinese working in Nairobi, and we got other people, like Europeans, Americans, and so on, because Nairobi has a lot of international, it's a huge international community. That was shocking. In 7 years opening the store, no Africans allowed to shop in the store. He could get away with it. This, by the way, is not exception. It's quite fairly common, right, in many places. But in this case, it's exception in the sense he openly said it, and he said no, not even a single one is allowed. That's really kind of extreme. I don't know whether it's not a single one in 7 years or not, but he seems to be, and oh yeah, no more. That to me, to show the gap for perception between the two, is rather big. All right, this is a little cartoon showing that the U.S. West is missing out in African safari. Xi Jinping and his African host enjoy safari, and Westerners are running behind. That's kind of a couple. But America is there. This is the American Millennium Project Authority in Ghana, in Accra. visit, talk to the top managers. The United States appropriate $540 million for 5 years. Now it's up for renewal. The almighty Congress may or may not approve that. So we don't know. We'll see. But that's what they do. They use money about a third for roads and power plants, a third for training purposes, a third for NGOs. So it's like a distribution. Well, interesting enough, among the contracts, the American grant offer, 40% goes to whom? Goes to Chinese contractors. Right. So China gets 40%, and there's a zero American company taking a contract out of American money. That's really kind of interesting to me. I was kind of impressed by that. Right? Because no American bidders, when they open up this road, how much money we're going to bidding, no American bidder. And oftentimes, all bidders are Chinese, no other people. They need to get the route done, so therefore, only Chinese. The Chinese counterpart is also developing. It's called China-Africa Development Fund. This is their office also in Accra, Ghana. Visit there and talk to the manager there. And of course, didn't tell them I just visit the American office. That's kind of we don't want to do that, or vice versa. But anyway, this is kind of a big operation. The Chinese government appropriated billions for this particular office. They had $2 billion appropriated since 2010, up to $10 billion. That's a B. Whereas American money starts with M. That's a big difference, right? And on top of that, Sinopec, the Chinese oil company, just pledged another $3 billion on top of that, right? And how much goes to American contractors out of this money? What's your guess? Zero. And not only the contract goes to Americans at zero, all the contracts offered by the Chinese assistants, all Chinese contractors, 100%, or joint ventures with local partners. So that's the difference. So they're very active, very ambitious, and very big, much bigger than U.S. operation. In the 7 countries I visited, I only found one U.S. African academic joint venture. This is in Botswana, between my alma mater, UPenn, and Botswana University. Notice, they're located in a mobile home, right, in a trailer home. Literally on the edge of campus. I'm not joking, literally on the edge of campus of the University of Botswana. But where is the Confucius Institute located? Right in the center, in the main building. And this is the Confucius Institute actually in surrounding Africa. You see, in academic exchanges, Chinese are default. I was interviewing some Kenyan professors, and they were talking about how little America has done for Kenya, and how much criticisms we have levied against Kenya. Right? So, and he said, so Professor Wang, tell me what America has done for us for Kenya. I just happened to see there's an American window right outside the window. Right, on campus, said, hey, this building, American window. It's donated by Americans. And he said, you have to go take a look how run down it is, how old it is. It's kind of true. It was done like decades ago, right, a long time ago, and on campus university. I guess that time it was donated by the United States, so it's called American Way. In the same city, this is a Chinese newly built state guest house. Very nice, glittering. And they did this in under 3 years, very quick, right? Boom, stuff is done. And they opened only 1 month before I checked. I stayed there for 1 night, and before I checked in. Glittering, very new. Unfortunately, quality is debatable. It's questionable. I guess the manufacturer of door frame and the manufacturer of doors didn't talk to each other. So they have a big kind of a big gap when you close the door. It's like, wow, it's a big gap. An irregular gap, but it's kind of and the faucet and the basin, all wonderfully done. You know, stainless steel and marble, they don't match. So whenever they open it, water splash all over. But it's good in the place, right? It's nice, right? And for me, the worst thing is they design a fish pond. It's like Chinese feng shui idea, you know, to design a big fish pond and waterfall in the courtyard. Nice, very nice look. They forgot one thing. Africans don't use many pesticides. So when you have a pond sitting in tropical Kenya without pesticides, what happened? Mosquitoes. I had most mosquito bites this place than the whole Africa combined. The 5-star hotel has mosquitoes everywhere. Right? So that's a little design flaw, I should say. Right? But it's glittering, it's nice. And compared to the American wing, who is more impressive? Clear, right? And this, of course, this fancy 5-star hotel has to be well protected. Oh, this one I have to put. In this hotel, they have the state-of-the-art lawnmower. It's a solar-powered, self-charging lawnmower. I was really dumbfounded. In Kenya, labor cost is so low. So this little thing, you can hire 100 lawnmowers, create 100 jobs, right? But they give this state-of-the-art. Just to impress people. This is very impressive. I was actually impressed with the picture of that. Wow, this is like, really, really impressive. Nothing like that. The thing moves around, moving along, and get self-charging, and get solar power. Wow, high technology. And all this has to be protected, of course. This is protection. So when I met my Kenyan friends, I was telling them I'm staying in maximum security hotel. Not quite maximum security prison, but maximum security hotel. It's really behind barbed wire and so on, well protected. All right. Let me speed up a little bit. Of course, this is another Chinese building in Zanzibar, local parliament building, designed, constructed by Chinese contractor. Does it remind you of any particular building? No? Totally new design, right? Completely innovative new design. But don't feel too bad. American presence is there. Contrary to almost stealth presence of Chinese in Africa, America's presence is everywhere, even though collectively we choose to ignore Africa. American presence. I tell this little story. In University of Nairobi, I was talking to 6 Nairobi university students, freshmen and sophomore, and asked them how many do they have cell phones. They all have cell phones, right? And then I asked them how much is it. They all complain, too expensive and so on. Then I asked them, who make your cell phones? Who make your cell phones? Where do you come with cell phones? They all say from Korea. All Korean cell phones. I can't even believe that. And I said, well, can you open it up? Let's see who made the cell phones. They opened it up. They're all made in China. The students are all embarrassed. And my faculty friend, I didn't make him to open his phone because I don't want to embarrass him. He thinks his phone was also made in Korea. So that to me is a stealth presence. The Chinese goes everywhere, but yet they are known as Korean phones. It was kind of strange. Contrary to that, Americans were everywhere. American influence everywhere. This is my hometown pride in Coca-Cola from Atlanta, right? So I took a lot of pictures for Coca-Cola. Literally everywhere, every country. And even little Pepsi too, right? Think about that. Even Pepsi is there as well. And different countries all over. The Chinese brand names in Africa almost non-existent, except for a couple of billboards for hair, refrigerator, and only in South Africa I saw chili and cherry dealership for Chinese cars. Other than that, no existence. But Chinese are providing most of daily consumer goods in Africa. Import. So that's really kind of strange, stealth presence. All right. If you think America is kind of largely diminished in Africa or is disappearing from Africa, think again. This is in one of those local buses. Don't ask me why I take local buses, because it's kind of really was a testing moment. But I did. And this is in the bus. You see, American flag is decoration. This is not especially done for me, by the way. I was not known as an American at the time, right? And there's no other American in the car. Actually, no foreigner in the car, in the van. But they use the American flag decoration. I have never seen any place that use Chinese flag decoration. Right? And this is another one. This is the taxi. Again, not for me, right? Nothing special. And this is again another one in the van. Look at the American flag in the city, right? I don't know. You guys can draw some conclusion from this, right? This American presence is clearly there. Not just Coca-Cola, but also Star and Spangled, the flag, right? And this, of course, where President Obama paid a visit to Ghana, where the ancient slave trade was taking place. And this is one of the places. And they put a flag there. I took a picture, the president took his family there too. That was very impressive. to Africans. This is it's called Cape Coast Ghana. All right, this is in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam, in the airport. Basically, it's a local bank advertising their financial products, right? And notice, what to them means money, means wealth. The dollar bill, big man, right there, right? Not Chinese money, not local money, right? And it's also in Dar es Salaam, in the airport, foreign exchanges. You see, they have a lot of foreign currencies, they want them all. But they particularly want American dollars. They particularly want American $100 bill, big dollar bill. You get a better rate. And they have Chinese yuan here, Chinese yuan somewhere here. No price. So I asked them, say, why don't you have a price here? They said, we don't want Chinese yuan, give us dollars. So that tells you. This is Tanzania. Tanzania is considered one of the best Chinese friends in Africa, in the whole Africa. Incidentally, before I get to this last one, incidentally, I visited many national museums in Africa, including Tanzania, Zimbabwe, the Chinese friends. I want to pay attention to what they are displaying. They have a lot of shows of colonial era, the ancient era, the aboriginals, natural life, landscape, culture, and so on. Lots of them. And the British rule, of course, right? And so on. No display, no mention of China whatsoever, except for 2 black-white pictures in Tanzania National Museum to talk about Tanzania founding president, his visit to China in 1960s. And his picture was Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, and so on. Just 2 black-white pictures. No mentioning of the famous Tanzania-Zambia Railroad, for example. No mention of Chinese medical teams. No mention of explosive Chinese president. In the same Tanzania Museum, National Museum, in the courtyard, there's a nicely constructed shrine. If you go there, you can see by yourself, to commemorate the embassy bombings that took place a few years in the 1990s in Dar es Salaam and Morocco. Probably some of you probably knew that, right? In which 1 or 2 Americans got killed, over 100 local people got killed, and a nicely shrine with American Secretary of State's letter carved literally in stone in commemorating this. Tells you a little bit. To me, it shows a little bit about the African hearts and minds, where they are. All right, lastly, I'm going to share you with this picture. Take a look at this picture. This is this is an airport. This is a major airport in Africa, right? In the capital city of an African country. And this country also is a great friend of China's, right? And also this country openly professes anti-Americanism, right? And so on. If you know Chinese characters, you probably notice something familiar. Visitors, 游客. Visitors, 游客. Visa, 签证费. 签证费, or in Chinese. And also in simplified Chinese characters. To me, I was shocked. Is this Beijing or somewhere? It looks like Beijing airport, right? Because it's a design constructed by the Chinese, and now with Chinese letters everywhere. It's just reverse order. In Beijing, you have Chinese on top, English below. And here's English on top, Chinese below. So where is this place? You may be asking. Well, another picture of this. By the way, another picture. This is not Beijing. This is Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe. It's just shocking, impressive. Wow, this is unbelievable. I took some pictures. They didn't, protest. I took some pictures there. Right? Then you may be wondering, so the Chinese must be masters here. They must be most welcome here, right? They must be like in control here. Like my South African friend mentioned, Chinese Empire, new colonial empire. Well, take a look. This is a Zimbabwe fee for single entry 1 month visa into Zimbabwe. Like how much you pay to get a visa. The naughty Americans, they pay $30, right? Okay, we pay $30. Those Americans will get landing visa. No question asked, no form to fill, just pump, $30. That's it, go in, right? Have a good time. We're supposed to be enemies. Well, doesn't matter. Russians, $30. Japanese, $30. UK, $55. Well, Zimbabwean leadership does not like the UK is not secret. Everybody knows why it's the case, right? Older colonial master, the disputes over land, white farmers got kicked out and so on. Right? It's just not surprising to you. So it's easy to understand. What surprises the Canadians? Canadians pay 75. right? And I was actually surprised why Canadians face money. Like, as a colleague of mine who was working in a plant, she actually looked up. So why are Canadian? What kind of problem Canadian? Canada? So usually you have Canadians get better treatment than Americans, usually, right? Because they're hiding behind big guy, they don't take the blame. They already enjoy benefits, and the big guy take the blame, right? But this time's reversed. Okay. Then I found out the Canadian government did the unthinkable a few years ago. They frozen the personal asset of President Mugabe. Wow. So that's the deal. Right? That's nice. Okay, now I realize. Okay, good. That's fine. So in other words, the Zimbabweans treating their, guests differently. They treat people they don't like, tend to know more. Now, what about Chinese? First thing, Chinese cannot get landing visa. Landing visa is not available to them. They have to apply at least 14 days in advance. Big hassle. I literally talked to some Chinese businessman, and one Chinese businessman said, pretty big shot, of a state-owned company. And he was there by himself. I said, well, how can you by yourself? Oh, my secretary couldn't come. So what happened? She didn't get her visa in time. She was like complaining, it's just like by himself. If you know how Chinese big CEOs operate, you know how painful that is. Your lovely, helpful secretary is not with you. That's terrible, right? Because she couldn't get her visa on time. 14 days in advance, documents. Worse, they pay more too. So with that, I stop my talk and look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Very insightful, and I learned a lot from his 5 weeks trips of adventure in Africa, and he really thought through all what he saw in Africa. So now the floor is open, and you have another, how many minutes? 20 minutes to raise your questions. Okay, try to brief and identify yourself.
I'm Ed Ward. Thank you very much for coming. It was a great presentation, very enlightening. Do you think that the U.S. leadership, and I'm talking now about a broad period of time over several administrations and business leadership, do you think that the Chinese efforts in Africa are viewed as a threat in any significant way?
Great question. Of course, I cannot speak for U.S. government. I don't really know what they think. Based on what I heard, I think Africa now is still in a status of kind of being ignored and just being watched. United States government has really increased effort in Africa, and President Obama signed off on a new policy about the development plan, strategic plan for Southern Africa. That's a government document. It's a legally binding document, and calling for more U.S. activities in Africa. But in nowhere you see the government is talking about Chinese threat. It's almost like 800-pound gorilla in the room. No one wants to talk about it, but everybody has that in mind. If you talk to African elites, government officials, they always keep remind you that, hey, you should do something, about Chinese person here. Because for many Africans, the ideal situation is to have a positive, they call positive competition between U.S. and China in Africa. Right? That's the best situation. Right? If the United States is not answering the competition, it's not meeting the competition, they feel disappointed. Understandable, right? They wish there's competition. So, quote, we can make a better choice as an African position. I think in some corners of government in the United States, they do realize the Chinese gain in Africa may be a loss on the American side. So there's a kind of threat issue. But also, as I saw in the field, I do not necessarily see that as a direct threat yet, simply because the gains made by the Chinese are not necessarily the losses for the United States. Let me give you one example. The Chinese have constructed a lot of roads, right? Well, lots of power halls too, but roads. But guess what kind of cars are running on those roads? Very, 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 very few Chinese vehicles. And surprisingly, many Fords, GM, and Chrysler. Right? So the more roads the Chinese constructing, for example in Ghana, there's a boom of infrastructure construction. There's also a boom of road traffic. The traffic is horrible, right? Where do they get all the cars? Many of them are from the United States, Japan, Korea, and Europe. Very few from China. So at least in this area, you see a lot of overlapping, not necessarily direct threat. But there's one area you could say is a potential challenging implication of Chinese presence in Africa. That is, the Chinese may be displacing the institutions, norms, the Westerners and Americans have been trying to create in Africa. So many European NGO activists are complaining that after 20 years of hard work, now the Chinese come in, their work is all wiped out because the local elites don't have to listen to you about civil society, education, and rights and so on anymore. They get money from China. So therefore they feel they are displaced. So in that regard, maybe there's some kind of a challenge and threat. In terms of security, it's hard to tell because it's very early and China is very careful and very cautious in doing anything military in Africa. And in terms of widely speculated Chinese monopoly of control of resources, minerals, energy, I think that's a very 20th century or 19th century world. Because today, in 21st century, it's a globalized market. The Chinese get more oil from Africa that only contribute to lowering of the oil price on the international market. Right? Let me give you one example. The Chinese spent billions, lots of diplomatic capital to secure lots of oil contracts in Sudan and now Southern Sudan. Right? They got these contracts. Presumably, they can ship all the oil, get the oil, and get them out of the ground and ship back to China. Presumably, right? Wrong. What they did is the Sinopec, the Chinese oil giants, in return, very quickly, they sold 85% of their oil contracts, up to 85% of the oil contracts to BP, to ExxonMobil, to make a quick buck. Why not? So as long as you have a globalized market, the so-called control of local supply of minerals is a little bit dated. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. Unless and until the Chinese have strong military, they can safeguard this place and safeguard shipping lanes and exclude all other consumers. Then we're talking. Right now, it's Chinese Navy is still blowing water. It's not getting to Africa much at all. Thank you. Sure.
Okay, yes, over there.
I'm Nikki. I'm an undergrad here, and I studied abroad in Beijing. But I was just curious.
So notice the airport, right? You see the airport. You're familiar.
I was just curious. You were talking about pesticide use and kind of like predatory extraction with mining. But did any of the African people you talked to express any concerns over the environmental consequences of Chinese investment?
Great question, and thank you for reminding me. Yes, indeed, there have been lots of complaints on the ground, especially in places I didn't go to. I didn't have time to go to. For example, Madagascar. I really want to go to Madagascar, but in Madagascar, it's become a big issue. The Chinese have created what they call very negative impact on the environment, because, for example, Madagascar is known for a lot of very rare species of animals, turtles, fish, and so on. And the Chinese, we Chinese are gourmet eaters. We eat anything, right? So therefore, Chinese go there, they start to eat all this stuff, and the stuff start to disappear, and that causes problem, right? And that happens in Zambia, in Kenya, and now the Vietnamese are joining the play. Chinese Vietnamese are fingered out as the reason for disappearance of rhinos in Africa, for example, especially black rhinos, because somehow they believe the horn of rhino has special potency, which is strange. But yes, environmental impact in terms of biodiversity, in terms of pollution, in terms of destroying the mine deposit. Because if you extract the mines in a kind of predatory way, you actually destroy the deposit. You make the further development much harder to do. Right? You just pick and choose, get the richest deposit in the points, right? And you ruin the whole deposit. Right? And also there are reports about Chinese outsourcing their polluting industry to Africa, like the Japanese and many others did, Taiwanese did to China itself years ago. That also is true, like a textile, like dyeing and the printing and stuff. Those very polluting industries. So it is a major concern. So that's indeed a growing concern, a growing complaint.
Okay, any more questions?
Yes, sir.
Hello, Barbara. How do you think the Africans would respond to a U.S. corporation and a Chinese corporation partnering to provide services, products, and such in Africa?
Great question. Actually, we talked about that in the U.S. Millennium Project Authority in Accra, Ghana. I kind of floated the idea, well, since you have the bidding process, why don't you invite some American firms come in to partner with cheap, better managed Chinese firms, do things together, right? Sort of to bring the goodies of both sides together to make something even better, right? That would be a great idea. But they told me that it's almost impossible to do that because company cultures, company rules, and just very different, right? And Americans, quote unquote, kind of expensive to hire, to go to Africa, and Chinese are kind of cheap, and sometimes they come with their own money, they don't need money, and they are disciplined. And Chinese state-owned enterprises, they are everywhere in Africa, in construction and so on. Their workers are managed in a quasi-military style. They live in a compound, they work together, they live in marching together, like soldiers. They pay much less than Americans, right? They easy to manage, they work overtime, they don't complain, and they don't go to local bars to have bar fights, because they don't speak local language, right? And so on. It's very difficult. But the silver lining of that is that there are American firms providing, quote, consulting service to, for example, American project consulting, but only providing consulting, legal service, but not involved with the construction. But that remains to be something to be explored. I believe that will be a good way to sort of minimize conflict, minimize competition, and also give Africans better deals, I think. Because deep down, many Africans still appreciate the nasty talk about rights, even human rights. They actually appreciate it. They think that they help society to change, to improve. They don't want too much of it, too much nanny. Yes.
I'm Ji Wei. I'm from DU Business School undergrad. I was just wondering if, like, the spectrum of how Chinese are perceived associated with the specific class in Africa, and if the elites are more likely to welcome the Chinese while the lower class are not as welcoming. Do you think there's a system issue with that they will rebel and that will make all the foreign direct investments in China just gone?
Great question. As somebody who grew up in China, but still way to remember when we were young, got an education. Classes matter, always matter. Classes matter, right? Classes do matter in Africa. In my paper, which based on my research, I actually describe that quite in some details. There are clear differences between different segments of society, different classes of society. Among the elites, for example, political elites, almost all like Chinese money, but some political elites have deep suspicion about China. That's kind of elite level. Academic elites, social elites have divided opinion. Some of them really think Chinese can help local economic development. Some think Chinese help is in wrong way, maybe retarding local development. With general masses, it's very hard to sample on the streets. But the general sense among the general public is, as long as the Chinese are constructing roads, fine, it's great. But if the Chinese take jobs away, like 1 million, 2 million come in, take the jobs away, which is happening in many places. So much so, some countries have already passed law prohibiting Chinese small stores from being opened. Right? The mom and pop shops in Africa is really taking a bite of the local job market, and that's terrible. And when the Chinese are digging gold on themselves without proper license, they're bad. So in Ghana, for example, the police arrested hundreds of Chinese miners and deported them, and causing huge financial loss to them, and actually in the process killed a few as well. Right? So it depends on who you ask. The small traders in Accra, for example, in Nairobi, they don't like Chinese at all. Small traders, small shop owners. But the drivers, the newly rich, they like the roads, and they like the infrastructure. They like the fancy 5-star hotels, and they don't particularly mind the mosquitoes, but they like the hotels. That's wonderful. And so it's diverse, but class do matter. Political elites, I think. In other words, China enjoy a very good popularity, very high popularity among leaders of Africa. That's clearly the case. If that matters, then that's very important.
Okay, last question here.
Last question.
Yeah, my name is Cody, and I'm just an undergrad. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the China's presence with regards to the illegal ivory trade, particularly with elephants, and kind of how are they benefiting from this trade?
Great question. I mentioned rhino horns. Rhino horns are now considered very, very precious, pricey in China and Vietnam, for that matter. Koreans just stopped doing that. I guess they changed their mind. They realized that thing is like fingernails. It doesn't really do any good. They just have to not to pay. Now in China, in Vietnam, rhino horn is 10 times expensive as gold. So if you get one piece of rhino horn, you're set. It's an African farmer or hunter. So rhino is decimated. Ivory is interesting. China joined international ban of ivory trade just recently, but they joined. And ivory, according to the report I read, ivory does not value that much at all on the international black market. Right? Ivory is not that expensive at all, so therefore the incentive is not that heavy. So elephants in Africa, as far as I can see, in Botswana, in Kenya, for example, they are not in danger. I think hundreds of elephants in South Africa. You know, if an elephant charging at our car, you know, it's kind of whoa, lots of things. So elephants, I guess, is less an issue right now because many countries joined the ban of ivory trade because ivory is not consumption, unlike a rhino horn. Rhino horn, literally people eat them, so disappear, consumed. Where rhino horns are kind of for display, for trade. If the trade is disrupted, then it really works to protect the elephant. So illegal ivory trade is still going, it's still ongoing, clearly. You see reports on local television stations, so, but not nearly as serious as rhino, black rhino in particular.
I mean, I don't know if you, did you hear anything about, I know, like, for example, the forest elephant is near extinction in the next 7 years.
That may have a lot to do with, unfortunately, not necessarily ivory trade, but with the change of economic mood, the production of agriculture changed. So people start to compete with the forest elephant, and also because it relates to the need of timber. For example, the Chinese may have contributed indirectly to that in terms of buying lots of timber from West Africa. I guess West Africa is where you're talking about, in Ghana and Ivory Coast, all these places, because the Chinese buying a lot of expensive kind of timber, wood, and in order to get this wood, you have to chop down the whole forest, so to speak, right? And that may have affected more, in my opinion, than ivory trade. But ivory trade, of course, contributed as well.
But not necessarily the sculpture of ivory in China. It's not really directly related to, you know, the cultural value of it in China. There's not really a direct correlation.
Well, as I said, ivory is a different kind of commodity than rhino horn because they stay. They need to be traded in order to be valuable. So if the international trade of it is disrupted, it's like art, stolen arts, right? Stolen arts, if the trade of stolen arts is disrupted, then the market of it is still limited, it's always limited. Unlike rhino horn seems to be unlimited because you eat that thing. You know, Vietnamese, Chinese think that thing is panacea. They pay 10 times as much as gold price for that thing as panacea. That means unlimited demand, not really so it's terrible. And similarly about the horns of lots of antelopes, different kind of antelopes. They also have different value in China, and also some kind of turtles in Madagascar. Those are consumed. You know, turtle soup, kind of cool, right? And so therefore, they have a bigger impact on the survivability of the species than ivory. The elephants, I guess, primarily because of agriculture, land development, and exploration.
Okay, with that note, let's conclude this forum and also the forum for this academic year. And so I will see you next year. Finally, please join me again to thank Professor Wang for such wonderful We are doing something else. We are missing a very, very good. Okay, thank you for coming.